My name is Margaret Fields. I'm 76 years old, and if you asked anyone in town, they'd tell you I was the type of woman who gave too much and asked for nothing. I raised 2 children alone while running my late father's bookstore, cooked dinner every night even after arthritis settled into my knuckles, and stayed faithful through 5 decades of marriage to a man who, as it turns out, never loved me as much as I loved him. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the moment I opened my bedroom door and found my husband Robert of 52 years, in bed with my daughter. My own daughter, Savannah. She wasn't even ashamed. She looked me in the eye, wiped her lipstick from his collar and said coldly, "You were always too old for him anyway." The walls of my soul shattered. I stood there, gripping the doorframe to stay upright, and asked the only question I could whisper. Why? Robert wouldn't look at me. And Savannah? She smirked, stretched her legs out on my quilt and said, "Because you had everything I wanted." That was the moment I knew I had lost not just a husband, but my daughter too. And yet, it wasn't the end.
Well,
it was just the beginning of a betrayal that would strip me of everything. My home, my savings, my dignity, until I had nothing left but a plan. A plan they would never see coming. But before we get there, let me take you back to when I was just a mother who thought love and sacrifice could protect her from the evil growing right under her roof. Because that's where the story really begins. Back in the quiet little house on Willow Lane. The one I used to call home. It all started the day Savannah came back to live with us. She had just gone through what she described as a messy divorce. Tears in her eyes, suitcases in hand, wearing my old sweatshirt like she was still my little girl. I welcomed her back without hesitation. Course I did. What kind of mother would I be if I didn't? But even then there were signs I ignored. She kissed Robert on the cheek too long. She watched him when he was fixing the sink. She laughed at his dry jokes like a teenager in love, not a daughter admiring her father. Still I blamed myself. I thought maybe I was getting jealous of my own child. That menopause and the years had warped my mind into something bitter. So I turned away. Again and again. Even when I found her perfume on his coat. Even when she wore a nightgown I had bought for my honeymoon and said it made her feel vintage sexy. I convinced myself it was nothing. Until the day she took over the finances. "It's too much for you, Mom," she said sweetly. "Let me help." And just like that, my accounts became their accounts. My name was removed from the house deed. Quietly. Legally. The bookstore I had built from scratch. She sold it behind my back. Said it was underperforming. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. Robert began sleeping in Savannah's room at night, claiming it was because of my snoring. I started eating dinner alone in the kitchen while they shared wine on the porch, giggling like lovers. The worst part. They gaslit me. They made me question everything. When I cried, Robert said I was imagining things. When I screamed, Savannah told the neighbors I had dementia. She even brought in a doctor to evaluate me. He asked me what year it was. Answered correctly. He asked me who the president was. Told him. But when he asked me to describe my family relationships, I broke down sobbing. That's when they said I was unstable. Dangerous. They told the neighborhood I was suffering from late-onset psychosis. That I had become paranoid. So when Robert changed the locks, no one questioned it. And when Savannah told the pastor I'd gone to live with a cousin, he sent flowers, thinking I was at peace. But I was anything but peaceful. I was homeless. Sitting in the back seat of my old Chevy, engine off, rain tapping the windshield like a slow countdown. They had taken everything. My marriage, my home, my money. And then one morning I turned on the radio at the gas station where I brushed my teeth. And I heard Robert and Savannah being interviewed on a local station. Talking about their unique love story. They said they were unapologetically in love. Savannah called him her second chance. Robert said she made him feel young again. I screamed so loudly in the car that the cashier came running out. That was the day something inside me cracked. But not in the way they wanted. It was the beginning of my awakening. Because if they thought I was gone for good, they didn't know me at all. And what I did next. Changed everything. The next day, I returned to the house in disguise, wearing a floral dress from the Goodwill bin and a gray wig. I rang the doorbell. Savannah opened it. And I smiled. Because I knew something she didn't. I had come back for everything they stole. And I wasn't leaving alone. If this story hooked your heart, stirred your spirit, or made you whisper, "What happens next?" Like, comment, and subscribe. The story has just begun. Savannah squinted at me like I was a Girl Scout selling cookies she didn't want. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice laced with impatience. I smiled wider. "Yes, dear. I'm looking for Mrs. Holloway. I heard she lives here now." "Pretty house." She blinked. "I think you've got the wrong." "Or maybe," I interrupted softly, "I've got the exact right place." Her hand tightened on the doorframe. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't recognize me through the disguise, but something about me unnerved her. But that meant the mask was working. I had been invisible long enough. Now I'd use that invisibility to get everything I needed. She slammed the door without another word. I didn't knock again. Instead, I walked back down the porch and across the street to the empty rental house I'd leased under a different name. A small, dusty bungalow directly across from the home they had stolen from me. Perfect view. Perfect revenge. But let me rewind a bit. Because the truth is, you only understand a woman's fury when you understand her love. I met Robert when I was just 20. He walked into my father's bookstore wearing a trench coat and asked for a copy of The Great Gatsby. I handed it to him and asked if he believed in second chances. He said, "Only with the right woman." I was smitten. We married within a year. I gave him everything, a home, children, loyalty. I watched over Savannah when she had scarlet fever. I worked nights when Robert was laid off. I kept that bookstore alive when Amazon came and crushed every little business in town. I never complained. Even when Robert got distant. Even when Savannah started acting like I was the help instead of her mother. The only person who ever noticed how tired I was me. So when Savannah moved back in, I thought maybe it was life's way of giving us a second chance. A mother and daughter healing. Instead, it was a storm brewing. I noticed it first when Savannah started dressing differently. She'd walk around the house in silk robes. She'd call Robert darling when she thought I wasn't listening. I remember one morning I made French toast. Savannah sat down and said, "Ugh, again." Robert laughed and pushed the plate away. "Yeah, we're watching our carbs." I didn't say anything. I just put my plate in the sink and took a walk. That walk turned into a habit. Because silence was safer than confrontation. But silence also became their weapon. They began having closed-door meetings about family finances. Savannah said I didn't need to be involved because stress was bad for my heart. The bank stopped sending me statements. The bills stopped coming to my name. And then I found the documents. I wasn't snooping, at least not at first. I was just cleaning out the junk drawer when I found a manila envelope. Inside was a new deed to the house. With Savannah's name and Robert's. Mine was gone. So I confronted them. "You changed the deed?" I asked, my voice trembling. Robert rubbed his temples. "Margaret, we thought it'd be easier this way." "Easier for who?" I whispered. Savannah crossed her arms. "For all of us. You don't need the stress of property paperwork at your age." I stood there frozen. That night, I cried myself to sleep in the guest room. 3 days later I was locked out. They told the neighbors I'd gone to Florida. That I needed sunshine and rest. I slept in my car outside the old bookstore for 3 nights. On the 4th day, I walked into a small legal aid office. That was when the wheels started turning. The lawyer's name was Jenna. Young, sharp, and with eyes full of fury when I told her everything. She said one thing to me that I'll never forget. "They stole your life. But we're going to make sure they pay for every single breath of it." I told Jenna not to send anything yet. I wanted to watch first. Learn their patterns. So I moved across the street. Every morning, Savannah stepped out in her robe and kissed my husband. Every evening, They drank wine under the same porch I once watered roses on. And at night, planned. I started with the bank. Turns out, Savannah had forged my signature on several documents. Easy to trace, easier to prove, especially when she left a sticky note in her handwriting with my name signed on top of it. Jenna smiled when I gave her that. "Game on," she said. But I wanted more than legal revenge. I wanted emotional justice. So I began talking to people. Quietly. To the woman who cleaned their house. She told me Savannah had been bringing Robert to couples therapy under fake names. To my old church friend Agnes. She told me Savannah was planning a wedding. A wedding. To my husband. And not just anywhere. In my garden. The one I spent 30 years cultivating. That was the last straw. I called Jenna and said, "Send the letters. All of them. Notices of ownership fraud. Legal injunctions. Subpoenas." It was time. But I didn't stop there. I began talking to a local journalist. A woman who had lost her own mother in a messy inheritance battle. She agreed to do a story. Not about me but about women like me. Elder abuse. Financial betrayal. Daughters turning on their mothers. The piece went viral overnight. But Savannah had no idea I was behind it. She thought I was in Florida still sipping orange juice on the beach. Until the morning of her wedding. She stood at the altar in my backyard, wearing white lace, barefoot in the grass I had planted, smiling at the man I once called mine. The guests stood. The music played. And that's when a uniformed officer walked through the hedges. The officer handed Savannah an envelope. She opened it confused, then turned pale. Her hands began to shake. Robert grabbed the paper from her fingers. His jaw dropped. His face turned red. He looked toward the crowd, and then toward the house across the street, where I stood on the porch watching. My hand raised in a small, silent wave. If this chapter had your heart racing, your fists clenching, or your jaw on the floor, don't miss what comes next. Like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. The reckoning has only just begun. Robert stared at me from across the lawn, the wedding guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats as the violinist stopped mid-note. Savannah clutched the envelope like it had burned her, lips trembling, trying to process what had just been handed to her in front of everyone. The legal notice was clear. Fraudulent transfer of property. Court order to vacate immediately. Pending charges of elder financial abuse. I watched as panic took over her face, as her perfect little day unraveled under the weight of truth. Robert stepped forward looking furious. Not embarrassed, furious. But not at Savannah. At me. He stormed across the street like he owned it. Like I didn't exist in his past or present, like I was just a nuisance now disrupting his happily ever after. He reached the edge of my porch and growled, "What the hell is this, Margaret?" I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I simply leaned forward and said, "Justice." His face turned dark. "You're destroying everything." "No," I said, voice steady. "You destroyed it. The day you let our daughter crawl into our bed." And with that, I closed the door in his face. But behind that door I collapsed. My body shaking. My knees giving in. It wasn't victory I felt. Not yet. It was the pressure of 50 years of silence cracking all at once. Let me take you back, again. Because this betrayal didn't begin the day I found them in bed. It began much earlier. Long before Savannah moved in. Long before Robert changed. When Savannah was a teenager, she was always closer to her father. I never questioned it. Daughters and fathers often share a special bond. But even then, she showed signs of manipulation. Emotional tantrums, guilt-tripping, sulking when she didn't get her way. I chalked it up to growing pains. But I enabled her behavior without realizing it. I always defended her. Made excuses for her. When she pushed kids at school, I blamed the other children. When she cheated on a math exam, I told the principal she'd been under pressure. I let her grow up believing she was always right, even when she was cruel. Robert never corrected her either. He adored her. Sometimes I think more than he adored me. I remember the first time I saw something I couldn't explain. Savannah was 18. I walked into the den late at night and saw her sitting beside Robert on the couch, her legs draped over his lap, both laughing at something on the screen. It looked too intimate. When they noticed me, they both jumped a little. I laughed it off. Because who wants to believe the worst about their own child? Years passed, and I buried every strange moment. Every time Savannah crossed the line, I smoothed it over. Every time Robert distanced himself from me, I blamed work or aging. But the truth had been bubbling all along. And the second Savannah divorced her husband and walked back into our home like a wounded kitten, I should have seen it coming. She wasn't coming back to heal. She was coming back to take. And I made it so easy. Now, back in my house, their house, I watched from the shadows as their fairy tale fell apart. The wedding was cancelled. The guests left in stunned silence. Savannah didn't return that night. Neither did Robert. But I stayed up, sitting by the window like I used to when Savannah missed curfew. Heart racing, mind racing more. At dawn, Jenna texted me. We've frozen the accounts. Everything's in motion. The bookstore funds. My pension. Even the hidden savings account Robert thought I didn't know about. It was all coming back to me. But money wasn't the point anymore. This was about dignity. About truth. 2 days later, I returned to the courthouse, dressed in my Sunday best. I held my head high as the clerk processed the complaint. Elder abuse. Coercion. Forgery. The case was real now. Savannah was served. And the town. Oh, the town was whispering. At the grocery store, women looked at me with quiet sympathy. At church, the pastor prayed for the strength of mothers who've been betrayed. And on the community Facebook page, someone anonymously posted a link to an article about daughters who seduced their fathers. I didn't post it, but I read it. And I cried. Because no matter how strong you are, nothing prepares you for the shame. Not just because of what they did, but because you let it happen. Still, I had one more piece to move. Letter. To be read at the next city council meeting, where Robert was supposed to receive a lifetime recognition award for decades of service and moral leadership. I mailed it anonymously. In it, I detailed the betrayal, the abuse, the incestuous relationship hidden behind closed doors. I enclosed photocopies of the forged documents, the altered deed, the appointment Savannah made with the estate lawyer pretending to be me, and I sent it straight to the mayor. The fallout was immediate. Robert's award was revoked. The police opened an investigation. Savannah's old husband even came knocking, demanding answers and legal restitution of his own. Their perfect world began collapsing. And me. I started smiling again. For the first time in years, I opened my windows in the morning, played old jazz records. I repainted the bedroom where I'd found them. And I replaced the mattress. Burned the old one. Literally burned it in the yard. Neighbors watched in silence. No one stopped me. But even as I rebuilt my life, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Because Robert showed up again. Not with anger this time. With tears. He stood at my door, disheveled, hands shaking, begging me to let him in. He said Savannah had left. Said she drained his account. Said she'd disappeared without a trace. He was broke, alone, and he wanted me back. I stood there in silence, the man who stole everything from me now begging for my grace. I looked him in the eyes and said, "You'll always be the father of my children." Then I reached behind the door. And what I pulled out made his knees buckle. If this story shook you, if you've ever been wronged by those closest to you, stay with me. Like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Because I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Robert's eyes widened when I pulled the thick, bound envelope from behind the door. It had the court's seal on it. Official. Cold. Final. This, I said quietly, is the lawsuit. Civil. Criminal. Personal. Every count that you and Savannah thought you buried under charm and lies. It's in here. His lips parted, trembling. Margaret, please. I'm ruined. She left me with nothing. You're all I have. I should have felt satisfaction. Triumph. Even glee. But all I felt was a deep, aching hollowness in my chest. This was the man I gave my youth to. The man who held my hand through childbirth. Who promised forever, and then handed me betrayal instead. You already had me, I whispered, voice trembling. And you threw me away. He reached for me. I stepped back. Get off my porch. His shoulders sagged. His hands dropped to his sides. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller, like a deflated shell. And yet I didn't feel pity. Not anymore. Not after the nights I spent in my car. Not after eating dinner at soup kitchens while he and Savannah toasted wine in my dining room. You have 3 days to vacate, I added. The court order is in effect. He blinked. Where will I go? Shrugged. You should have asked me that before you replaced me with our daughter. With that I closed the door. Again. This time I didn't collapse behind it. I stood there. Ill. Steady. I had survived the impossible. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because the next morning I got a call from Jenna, my lawyer. Margaret, she said slowly, you might want to sit down. I'm standing, I replied. What is it? Savannah, she said, has filed a counterclaim. She's alleging you mentally abused her as a child. That you fabricated all of this to cover up your guilt. My knees wobbled. I grabbed the back of the kitchen chair. She what? She's playing the long game. Trying to flip the narrative. Paint herself as the victim. I sank into the seat, heart pounding. Course she was. Savannah wasn't the type to lose quietly. She's hired a high-profile lawyer from the city, Jenna continued. They're going to make this messy. I clenched my fists. Let them. Because I knew the truth. And the truth eventually always wins. Still, I wasn't naive. I understood the world we lived in. People didn't want to believe daughters could do things like this. That husbands could be that complicit. People wanted neat stories. Good moms. Loving daughters. Not this. So I gathered everything I had. Journals. Receipts. Phone records. Witness statements. I even asked the cleaning lady, Maria, to testify. She agreed. She said she'd seen them kissing in the hallway. Said she heard things no daughter should say to a father. The trial was scheduled for 2 months later. In the meantime, Savannah started her smear campaign. She posted on social media. When your own mother turns into your enemy. #ToxicParents, #Survivor. She went on podcasts. Told lies. Cried crocodile tears about growing up in a controlling household. Claimed I was jealous of her beauty. Her youth. I didn't respond publicly. But privately. I prepared. Every lie she told, I countered with truth. Every sob story she sold, I built a mountain of evidence to crush. I even found her old high school guidance counselor. Retired now, living in Vermont. She remembered Savannah. Remembered how manipulative she was. Wrote a statement. Said Savannah once faked an assault to get out of an exam. Bit by bit, Savannah's story began to unravel. But then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo. Savannah, age 19. Kissing Robert on the cheek at a cabin I didn't recognize. Behind them. Bed. Too much closeness. Too much intimacy. Too much truth. And on the back of the photo, 2 words. Ask Janet. Janet was Robert's sister. Estranged for decades. I hadn't spoken to her since '89. Picked up the phone. Janet, said cautiously. Long pause. Margaret, she replied. Her voice was gravelly, cautious. I wondered when you'd call. I need to know the truth, I said. About Robert. About Savannah. She exhaled deeply. It started long before you think. What do you mean? When Savannah was 14, she started spending summers with Robert's mother. I thought it was innocent. Until I walked in one night and saw her straddling his lap while he read a book. He pushed her off and yelled, but it wasn't the first time. My breath left me. Janet continued. He told me she was just confused. That he was trying to discipline her. I wanted to tell you. But Robert threatened me. Said I'd ruin the family. My hands shook. He said if I ever opened my mouth, he'd destroy me. So I stayed away. Photo. The words. The gaslighting. It all made sense now. It wasn't just Savannah manipulating Robert. It was both of them, locked in a sick, codependent spiral for years. Had been a mother, wife, shield. And in their twisted world, I had become a threat to their fantasy. I thanked Janet for her honesty. And then I called Jenna. We're changing the case strategy, I said. I want to go public. Jenna hesitated. Are you sure? It'll get ugly. I want the world to know, I said. Exactly what they did. No more shame. No more silence. So we gave the story to the press. Everything. The grooming. The betrayal. The fraud. The manipulation. A prominent journalist picked it up. The mother they tried to erase. Trended for a week. Suddenly, people weren't just whispering. They were watching. And Savannah. She vanished. Deleted her accounts. Moved out of town. Her lawyer withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable lies. But Robert remained. 'Cause now, he had no one else. A week before the trial, Robert showed up again. But not at my door. My church. He walked in mid-sermon, tears streaming, begging the congregation to pray for him. I was seduced, he cried. I was broken. She ruined me. And then he turned to the pulpit and said something no one expected. I want to confess something about my daughter. If this chapter rattled your soul or pulled tears from your eyes, don't go just yet. Like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Because the truth is finally breaking through the lies. And justice. Just getting. The entire congregation sat frozen. Even Pastor Roy, who'd spent 30 years preaching through storms, funerals and scandals, was speechless. You could have heard a pin drop on that old red carpet when Robert's voice cracked at the pulpit. I want to confess something, he repeated, gripping the edges of the podium like it was holding him up. About my daughter. My body tensed in the pew, my fingers clenching around the worn pages of my Bible. I had come to church for peace, not this. Not him. Not a last-minute performance meant to gain sympathy. I crossed a line, he said, voice trembling. Whispers rippled through the sanctuary. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward me, then quickly away. Years ago, when Savannah was just a girl, I should have stopped it. I should have set boundaries. But instead, I let things get blurry. Someone behind me muttered, Dear Lord. I told myself it was harmless, that it was just affection. But it wasn't. And Margaret, his voice cracked, she was the only one who ever saw it for what it was. And I punished her for it. Tears rolled down his cheeks. And for the first time since all this began, I saw a flicker of the man I once loved. But it was too late. Too damn late. Because a confession in a church wasn't repentance. It was strategy. After the service, people gathered around me in hushed concern. Some offered hugs. Others stared like I was some TV drama brought to life. But I didn't cry. Not that day. I walked straight out of the building, past Robert, who called out, Please, Margaret. Just hear me. Kept walking. 'Cause I had heard him for 50 years. Now it was time he heard me, in court. The trial began the following week. And what unfolded in that courtroom? It wasn't just a battle of right and wrong. It was a war of masks and mirrors. Lawyers. Testimonies. Paper trails. But no lie could survive what I brought. I took the stand. Jenna walked me through every heartbreak. How did you discover the affair? She asked. I opened my bedroom door, I said, voice steady. And found my husband in bed with our daughter. The jury flinched. And what did she say? Jenna continued. I swallowed. She said, You were always too old for him anyway. Gasps again. But this time no pity. Only anger. For me. We called Maria the housekeeper. She testified to the affection, the inappropriate touching, the night she stayed late and heard sounds no daughter and father should make behind closed doors. Janet flew in. Took the stand. told her story. Even Savannah's ex-husband Malcolm came forward. He described how Savannah confessed her feelings for Robert during their marriage. He said she used to joke about being daddy's girl in every way that mattered. It was nauseating, harrowing, shameful, but it was true. And Robert, his lawyer, tried to spin it as mental instability. That Savannah was the manipulator. That Robert was seduced, trapped, confused. But the evidence told another story. The deed, the accounts, the therapy receipts, the forged signatures. He wasn't confused. He was complicit. And when Savannah finally appeared, summoned by subpoena, she walked into the courtroom looking nothing like the siren who once ruled my home. Her face was pale. Her designer clothes hung off her like cheap fabric. Her once bright eyes were dark with defiance and decay. She took the stand and lied. "None of it's true," she said coldly. "My mother's jealous. She always has been." "Of what?" Jenna asked. Savannah's lips curled. "My connection with Dad. The love I had. The life I could have had. But you lived in your mother's house. She never earned it." "You mean the house she bought, maintained, paid for?" Savannah didn't answer. And then came the final blow. "Photo." Jenna held it up. "Do you recognize this?" Savannah stared. "This was taken the year you were 19. You told people you were at a women's retreat. But this isn't a retreat, is it?" Silence. "We have testimony placing you and Robert at a private Airbnb that weekend. And this picture was taken on a camera Robert purchased just days before." Still she said nothing. Jenna walked closer. "Were you sleeping with your father, Savannah?" The judge banged his gavel. "Counsel, be careful. It's a yes or no question," Jenna said firmly. Savannah turned to the jury and, for the first time, let her mask slip. Her voice dropped. Her face twisted. "Do you know what it's like to want something so bad your whole body aches for it? He made me feel special. Not like some daughter, but like a woman." The courtroom went still. And just like that, the case was over. No one could unhear what she'd just said. No jury could pretend this was anything but evil. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty. On all counts. Robert was sentenced to 10 years for fraud, coercion, and elder abuse. Savannah was committed to a psychiatric facility for further evaluation and removed from my life permanently. And me. I stood on the courthouse steps, the wind in my hair. 50 pounds of silence finally lifted off my back. I was free. Free of the lies. Free of the shame. Free of them. But freedom, I learned, is lonely. Because even justice doesn't erase the pain. I still woke up some nights reaching for a husband who betrayed me. I still stared at pictures of a daughter who once made me laugh so hard I cried. But I found peace in rebuilding. I reopened the bookstore. Under a new name. Margaret's Second Chapter. And I began to host weekly meetings there for other women like me. Abandoned, betrayed, erased. We sit in circles, sip tea, and tell our truths. Because silence is what they count on. And I'll never be silent again. One evening, after closing up shop, I found a letter slipped under the door. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper with 6 haunting words. "You still don't know everything, Mom." If this story shattered your heart and lit a fire in your chest, please like, comment, and subscribe. Because in the next chapter, secrets resurface. And peace isn't always permanent. I stood in the darkened bookstore, fingers trembling as I held the note. "You still don't know everything, Mom." My eyes scanned the empty sidewalk outside. No shadows. No footprints. Just the silence of dusk creeping over the town like fog. I locked the door behind me and turned the sign to closed, heart pounding like war drums in my chest. I had thought it was over. That the trial had unearthed everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every sick secret. But now here I was again, staring down a ghost I hadn't invited. I took the letter upstairs to my small apartment above the shop. Sat in the same floral armchair I used to rock Savannah in when she was a baby. My mind spun with possibilities. Who had sent it? Robert. Someone from court. One of Savannah's friends. Or worse, Savannah herself. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I drove to the psychiatric facility. I told the nurse I was her mother. She looked uncomfortable, but she nodded. She's not speaking much, the nurse said. But she did ask for paper and pens yesterday. Said she wanted to write something down. My stomach turned. Can I see it? The nurse hesitated, then returned a moment later with a sheet of notebook paper in a sealed bag. It was a sketch. Rough, childlike, but unmistakable. It was a picture of Savannah sitting on a swing. And behind her, a man. But it wasn't Robert. It was another figure entirely. Bald. Broad shoulders. No face. Just dark shading where the features should be. And on the top corner she'd written. He started it before Dad did. My breath caught. What? I drove straight to Janet's house. She opened the door, eyes wide. Margaret. Savannah said something. Something I don't understand, I said. She drew a man. Not Robert. Someone else. Janet went pale. Come in, she said quietly. We sat down in her small living room. I handed her the sketch. She looked at it. Followed. That's your brother-in-law. What? Peter, she said softly. Robert's older brother. My head reeled. Peter died when Savannah was a child. He had a stroke. No, she said. He had a heart attack. But before that, Margaret, he used to come around a lot when you were at the store. Said he wanted to help out with the kids. I never thought anything of it until one day I found him with Savannah in the basement. He said she'd fallen. But she looked off. I leaned forward. Why didn't you say anything? I told Robert, Janet whispered. But he told me I was overreacting. That Peter was harmless. Tears burned my eyes. It wasn't just Robert. It went deeper. Savannah wasn't born broken. She was broken into, by hands that should have protected her. I rushed home, pulled out old photo albums, and scanned every image of Peter. I compared them to the figure in Savannah's drawing. The height, the frame, posture. It was him. No wonder she'd turned to Robert later. No wonder the lines were always blurred. My heart broke anew. Because in all my pain, I had never stopped to consider her origin story. It didn't excuse what she did, but it explained it. The next day, I returned to the facility. They brought Savannah into the room in a pale blue robe. Her hair unbrushed, eyes dull. She didn't look at me. Savannah, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Was it Peter? Her eyes flickered. Then she nodded. Slowly, like it hurt. I told Dad, she said. He told me it was normal. Said girls like me brought it on themselves. I pressed a hand to my chest. Oh God. I thought if I made him love me, she whispered, he'd protect me from the rest. From everything. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream. Cry. To reach for her and pull her out of the darkness she'd been drowning in since childhood. But I didn't move. I'm so sorry, I whispered instead. I should have seen it. I should have saved you. She looked up, and for the first time in years I saw my daughter. The real one. Underneath the ashes. But the moment passed. She looked away again. It's too late now. I left the facility shaken. What was I supposed to do with this new truth? How do you mourn the monster and the victim? How do you love a child who tried to destroy you? Because someone else destroyed her. I spent the next few weeks in a daze. The bookstore became quiet again. The town had moved on. But I couldn't. Not yet. So I did something I hadn't done in decades. I drove to the cemetery. Peter's grave was at the edge near the woods. Weeds had grown over it. The stone was cracked. I stood there a long time. I hope hell has room, I said aloud. Then I spat on the dirt and walked away. Later that week I met with Jenna again. Do you want to reopen anything legally? She asked. No, I said. Let the dead stay dead. She nodded. But what about Savannah? I hesitated. She needs help. Real help, I said. Not a prison. Not punishment. You're forgiving her. No, I said firmly. I'm choosing peace. That's different. And peace came slowly. But it came. The bookstore began thriving again. People started dropping by just to talk. I launched a small reading circle for survivors. We called it Women with Ashes. And every week more chairs filled. We laughed. We cried. We healed. One page at a time. One memory at a time. One scar at a time. Then, one night as I was closing up, the bell above the door rang. Turned. And there she was. Savannah. Standing in the doorway. Hair brushed. Is clear. Hands shaking. Hi, Mom, she said. I read your article. The one in the paper. About surviving shame. I pause. I want to try again. If this story has taught you that pain can echo for generations, but so can healing, then don't go yet. Like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Because even from ashes, a life can still rise. Savannah stood there in the doorway like a stranger who used to live in my bones. Her voice was soft, unsure. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted you to know I'm trying. I couldn't speak. For a moment, all I could see was the girl in pigtails who used to scribble poems on napkins and leave them on my pillow. The same girl who held my hand during thunder and whispered, I love you more than the sky. And then I remembered the girl who watched me cry from the other side of a locked door. The one who stood beside my husband and told me I was old, replaceable, unnecessary. Come in, I said quietly. She stepped over the threshold. The bell chimed once more behind her. We sat across from each other at the old checkout counter, the very spot where I used to hand her lollipops when she came home from school. She looked thinner, hollow around the cheeks, but her eyes, God help me, they held a kind of regret I had never seen before. I've been journaling, she began. In therapy. They said if I wanted to face the future, I had to face the full truth. I nodded, still silent. They told me to trace it all back. And I did. And I saw everything. What Peter did. What Dad ignored. And how I twisted it into something I thought was power. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I hurt you, Mom. I hurt you because I didn't know how else to scream. My lip trembled. You did more than hurt me, I whispered. She nodded. I know. The silence between us wasn't peace. But it wasn't war either. It was somewhere in between. Fog slowly lifting. I'm not here for forgiveness, Savannah said. I know that has to be earned. But I want to fix something. What could you possibly fix? Yes. My voice wasn't cruel. Just exhausted. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a handwritten manuscript. I glanced at it. Ashes and Seeds. A Daughter's Reckoning. It's my story, she said. All of it. The abuse. The manipulation. What I did. What I became. I want you to read it before I send it anywhere. Send it where? I want to publish it. As a warning. As a confession. As a surrender. I stared at the title page. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Still curled at the ends. Still stubborn in its slant. I didn't agree to publish it. I didn't even say I'd read it. But I accepted the folder. That night, after she left, I sat in the window seat of my apartment and flipped through the pages. Line after line tore through me. Some memories reopened old wounds. Others offered answers to questions I didn't know I had. She talked about the first time Peter touched her. How she thought it was normal. How Robert didn't stop it, just ignored it. She wrote about the rage inside her. The silence. The sickness. And then the part that shattered me. I envied my mother. She had the love I could never get without pain. So I tried to take it. To become her. To replace her. Not because I hated her. But because I thought if I became her, maybe I wouldn't feel empty anymore. I wept. For her. For me. For everything in between. The next morning I walked to the garden behind the bookstore. The hydrangeas were blooming, full and loud. I knelt beside the stone path I'd laid by hand after the trial. There I buried Peter's photo. And beside it, I laid the drawing Savannah made in the psychiatric center. Because some truths didn't need to be remembered forever. Only faced. Later that afternoon, Savannah returned. I read it, I said. It's raw. And terrifying. And honest. She held her breath. And if you're brave enough to publish it, I'll stand beside you when you do. She broke down in front of me, the kind of sob that rips from the ribs and echoes through generations. I held her. Not like before, not like when she was a girl, but like two broken women trying to build something that resembled love from the ruins. Together we called a small press. We titled the book, Ashes and Seeds. Because from destruction came truth. And from truth, the tiniest green sprouts of healing. The book launched quietly. No national tour. No interviews. But it spoke. To mothers. To daughters. To women who thought they were the only ones holding decades of silence in their throats. Letters poured in. Emails. Phone calls. Some were from survivors. Others from family members who never believed. And one day, a letter arrived from someone I hadn't expected. It was from Malcolm, Savannah's ex-husband. He wrote, I never understood her until now. And I never understood you. I'm sorry for the way I judged your silence. I see you now. I read it aloud to Savannah. She smiled, soft and tired. I still don't deserve peace, she said. But you do deserve a chance to keep planting seeds, I replied. And that's exactly what we did. Every Saturday, Savannah helped me at the bookstore. We hosted mother-daughter healing circles. We read books aloud. We held silence when words were too much. And we learned something that should be taught to every generation. That justice is necessary. But healing is a choice. And we chose it. Together. But just when I thought the past had finally quieted, another envelope arrived. Inside was a document, sealed by the courts. It was from Robert. A final will. One I never knew existed. And what it revealed would force me to face one last storm. If you've followed this story from rage to reckoning, don't stop now. Like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Because some ghosts don't rest until the final truth is unearthed. The envelope was thick and official. No return address, just a government seal pressed into the flap. My name typed in all capital letters across the front. Margaret Fields. I didn't open it right away. I laid it on the kitchen table beside my tea and just stared at it, like it might burn through the wood if I touched it too soon. My hands shook. My gut twisted. It had been 6 months since Robert was sentenced and Savannah's book was published. 6 months of rebuilding, of holding healing in my hands like something delicate that might break again. I thought the worst was over. But that envelope said otherwise. When I finally slid it open with my letter opener, the one engraved with "For 50 years of love, R&M, the paper inside crackled like it carried a curse. It was a copy of Robert's final will. One he had signed after the trial, after the verdict, after prison. The date on it was just 2 months ago. What could he possibly have left to say? I read it slowly. And by the end, I felt like the floor had been yanked out from under me. To Margaret, you may never forgive me. I don't expect you to. But there is one thing I kept from you. Something I never told you because I thought it would ruin everything. You deserve to know now. Savannah might not be yours. The words blurred. Gasp. Read it again. In 1971, I had an affair. You had just lost our second baby. You were in bed for weeks, grieving. I was weak, selfish. And there was a woman, Elise, a friend of your sister's. She said it was over after one night. But months later, she was pregnant. She disappeared before I could ask questions. Then, somehow, Savannah came back into our life. Her mother died in a car accident. And I told you we should adopt her. That her parents were distant cousins. I lied. I wasn't just her father. I might have been her only blood. But I never got a DNA test. I was too afraid. I don't know for sure. I raised her as ours. But if she wasn't truly yours, I needed you to hear it from me. Sorry. For all of it. For everything. I dropped the letter. Staggered back from the table like it had exploded. Savannah, not mine. My body went cold. And then, it burned. All those years I held her in my arms. All those times I blamed myself for her coldness, her cruelty, her distance. Had I been mourning a bond that never existed? No, I had loved her. I had raised her, fed her, bled for her, fought for her. But this was a theft of something deeper than money or marriage. It was a theft of truth. Called Jenna. She confirmed the will was real. What do you want to do? She asked. Find out, I said. Once and for all. We ordered a DNA test. I didn't tell Savannah yet. Not until I had answers. The waiting nearly killed me. Weeks passed. And then the results came. I held the envelope in the same hands that once rocked her to sleep. Inside was a single line that changed everything. Probability of maternity, 0%. Savannah was not my biological daughter. I couldn't breathe. The room spun. Not mine. Not mine. Not mine. The words echoed in my skull. Everything I thought I knew about my family. My role, my sacrifice, my motherhood, was shattered in one sentence. I didn't know how to tell her. Would it free her? Or destroy her again? But fate made the choice for me. She walked into the shop that afternoon, smiling, holding a bouquet of gardenias. For you, she said. You've been on my mind all week. I stared at her. The girl I raised. The stranger I loved. Savannah, I said softly. We need to talk. We went upstairs. I told her everything. About the letter, the affair, test, and finally the result. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat there, silent, staring at her hands. After a long pause, she whispered, I always wondered. My heart cracked. You did. I used to look at you and wonder why I didn't feel closer. Why I didn't look like you. Why I felt like I was watching someone else's life from the outside. And now, yes. She looked up at me, eyes wet but steady. Now I know I wasn't crazy. But also, now I don't know who I am. I reached across the table. Took her hand. I don't care what the paper says, I whispered. I raised you. I wiped your tears. I held you through every fever. I loved you even when you made it impossible. She let out a shaky breath. I don't deserve it. You may never earn it, I said honestly. But you still have it. We sat there holding hands. Two women broken by men. By silence. By secrets. And somehow, still reaching for each other. The next week, Savannah included the DNA revelation in a new chapter of her book. She titled it, Daughter by Lie, Mother by Choice. It became the most shared chapter of the whole memoir. Readers called it brave, painful, redemptive. But to me, it was just truth. Truth we both needed. To move forward. To redefine what family meant. To rebuild not from blood, but from choice. One quiet evening, Savannah stood beside me in the bookstore, stacking a fresh shipment of her books. She turned and asked, Mom, do you think you'll ever fall in love again? I smiled bittersweet. But before I could answer, the bell above the door chimed. And in walked a man I hadn't seen in nearly 40 years. Margaret, he said. Thomas, I whispered. Savannah's eyes darted between us. And just like that, the past opened one last door. If this chapter left your heart cracked wide open, don't stop now. Like, comment, and subscribe. Because in the next chapter, new beginnings rise from old ruins. And love may still be waiting. He stood in the doorway like a memory I hadn't dared touch in decades. Thomas McKay, my first love. The boy I almost married before Robert charmed his way into my life with promises of forever and hands that held secrets. His hair was silver now, his face lined, but his eyes, those same stormy gray eyes, still had that soft ache in them. The one I used to fall asleep dreaming about when I was just 17. Thomas, I breathed. He stepped in cautious. Didn't mean to interrupt. I saw your name on the article. The book release. I was in town. Thought I'd come by. Savannah, standing behind the counter, was frozen, watching us like we were characters in a movie she wasn't supposed to see. "I'll give you 2 a minute," she mumbled and quietly stepped upstairs. Thomas chuckled nervously. Didn't expect her to look so much like Robert. I nodded slowly. Turns out she wasn't mine. Not by blood. He looked down. I read about that too. A pause filled the room. Heavy, but not uncomfortable. "I'm sorry for what happened to you, Margaret," he said, stepping closer. "I wanted to write. For years. But life," he shrugged. "It kept moving. Until it didn't," I said softly. He smiled. "Exactly." We sat across from each other at the same reading table where I'd taught Savannah her ABCs. Where I'd wept the night Robert was arrested. Where I signed the paperwork to reopen the store. And now, I was sitting across from the man who once asked me to run away with him to California. I said no then because I thought duty and love were the same thing. I knew better now. "You look good," I said, meaning it. He laughed. "You always were a terrible liar." But he blushed anyway. He told me about his life. His move to Oregon, his late wife, his 2 grown kids. He said he came back to our town after retirement, bought a small place on Maple Ridge. Said he walks past the bookstore often but never had the courage to step in. Till now. "You're still brave," I said. "I waited 40 years to say something I should have said the day you married Robert." He leaned in, voice low. "I never stopped loving you." Tears sprang to my eyes, but I didn't blink them away. I let them fall. Because it wasn't sadness this time. It was recognition. A warm hand reaching across time. Few days later, Thomas and I met for coffee. Then dinner. Then long walks under the magnolia trees behind the courthouse. The same courthouse where my name had once been dragged through the dirt was now just a landmark in the background of a new chapter. Savannah watched us carefully. She asked me one night, "Do you think you can really love again? After all this?" Smiled. "Not in spite of it, sweetheart. Because of it." She nodded slowly. "Maybe I can too. Someday." A month later, her second printing of Ashes and Seeds sold out. A publishing house in New York called. They wanted to buy the rights. A documentary crew asked to adapt her story. She looked at me and said, "Only if you're in it too." And I agreed. Because my story was no longer one of shame. It was one of survival. Of strength. Of love that grew back even after the soil was scorched. Thomas proposed quietly one night, while we were cleaning up the bookstore. He didn't kneel. He just looked at me with those same gray eyes and said, "May I hold your hand for the rest of the days we have left?" I didn't cry. I just said yes. And this time I meant forever. We planned a small ceremony in the garden behind the shop. The same one where Robert and Savannah had once tried to marry. But now it was something new. Something pure. My friends from church brought flowers. Savannah baked the cake. She even walked me down the aisle. Not as a daughter by blood. But as the one I raised. The one I chose. As I said my vows, I looked into Thomas's eyes and realized something. Pain doesn't leave. But it can be rearranged. Made into art. Into wisdom. Into a life that still breathes beauty. That night, after the ceremony, we danced in the garden beneath string lights and stars. Savannah sat nearby, laughing with guests. I watched her. Her eyes lighter now, shoulders no longer carrying the weight of unspoken things. And I thought, maybe this is how it ends. Not with a bang. But with peace. Real peace. The kind I never thought I'd find again. But just before we turned in for the night, Savannah slipped something into my hand. An envelope. No name. No return address. Opened it. Inside was a sonogram. A small bean-shaped figure floating on a dark screen. And written across the top in Savannah's handwriting. "I'm going to be a mother. And I want to do it right this time." If this story lit something in your soul, reminded you that healing is messy but beautiful, and that second chances come in many forms, please like, comment, and subscribe. Next chapter is the final chapter. One last sunrise. One last truth. One last miracle. I stared at the sonogram, my hands trembling, the faint lines on the image shaking as if the child inside was moving with the beating of my heart. A grandchild. From Savannah. From her. The girl who once stole everything from me. The woman who stood by my side now, fighting to give it all back. I looked up at her. Her face was soft, scared, hopeful. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "But I'm ready to be the mother I never had." I pulled her into my arms, and for the first time in our twisted, broken, and rebuilt journey, we held each other without weight or guilt. Just two women connected by history. And now by the future. "I'll be here," I said into her hair. "I'll help you. We'll raise this baby together." She let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like years. The next few months moved like honey, slow, thick with healing. Savannah started coming by every day. She helped shelve new books at the shop, sorted through letters from readers, and sat beside me at our Saturday healing circles, this time not as the speaker, but as the listener. She listened when a young mother said she couldn't forgive herself for missing the signs of her daughter's pain. She listened when an older woman, 68 and still bleeding from wounds inflicted in 1963, said, "You make me believe it's not too late to begin again." Savannah took those words home, folded them into her belly like lullabies. And me. I watched my daughter become a mother long before her child arrived. She started knitting badly, burned 3 attempts at lasagna, built a bassinet with her bare hands because she said, "I want something in this house made by me. Something real." One quiet Sunday, as the bookstore closed, I stood beside her in the mirror hanging near the entrance. We both caught our reflections at the same time. "I see her now," I said. "Who?" she asked. "You." She looked down at her round belly and smiled. The baby came in spring. A girl. Named Elise Margaret. Elise, after the woman who may have given birth to Savannah. Margaret for the woman who raised her. She placed the baby in my arms before she even held her herself. "She needs to know what strength feels like from the very beginning," Savannah whispered. My tears hit the baby's cheek, and she didn't cry. She just blinked up at me like she knew who I was. In that moment, all the pain, all the betrayal, all the courtroom testimonies, the silence, the years of doubt, it all folded into a quiet kind of joy. Not loud, not proud, just warm, real. After Elise was born, Savannah asked if she could move in upstairs above the shop with the baby. I agreed. Our lives, once torn apart by shame, now moved together with intention. We started hosting mothers' and daughters' evenings in the garden. We read aloud. We shared recipes. We shared grief, and love, and truth. Thomas stayed by my side through it all. He built a crib, painted the nursery a soft green. On quiet mornings, I'd find him sitting by the window, holding Elise as he hummed an old jazz tune only he remembered. Savannah caught him once and whispered, "You're everything I thought fathers were supposed to be." He teared up, kissed her on the forehead and said, "And you're everything I hoped daughters could become." It wasn't perfect. Some nights, I still woke up gasping from old dreams. Some mornings, Savannah still sat on the porch in silence too long. But healing isn't a destination. It's a daily decision. And we made it together. The bookstore grew. The community circled around us. We had no more secrets. Until the day a young woman walked in. Nervous. Holding a copy of Savannah's book. She asked for a signature. When Savannah flipped to the title page, she noticed something tucked inside. Letter. Inside. It said, "Because of you I told the truth. Because of you I got away. My daughter and I are safe now. Thank you." Savannah read it 3 times before handing it to me. Her hands shook, but her face didn't fall. She just nodded and whispered, "It was worth it." It was. And as I held Elise that night, rocking her beneath the soft creak of the ceiling fan, I whispered the same words to her that I wished someone had said to Savannah when she was born. "You are safe. You are loved. You are never too broken to be whole." A year later, on the first birthday of little Elise Margaret, the garden was filled with women from every corner of our town. Women who carried scars. Women who had stories. Women who had almost given up, but didn't. Savannah stood and read a new poem she'd written. And as the final line echoed across the garden, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "To the woman who never stopped showing up, even when the whole world told her to disappear, this is your legacy. A daughter reborn, a granddaughter loved, and a life finally lived on her own terms." I held my granddaughter in my lap, reached for Savannah's hand and smiled. The past didn't vanish, but it no longer ruled us, because we'd learned how to turn ashes into seeds. And this was the harvest. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the quiet power of mothers, and the miracle of second chances, like, comment, and subscribe. And always remember, no matter how broken it gets, love can still grow back.